we'll go ahead and chant it. And surpass, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. All right, glad everyone could be here. And just filling in Dean, who is at Edge Fest, seeing some jazz. And so I, just a reminder that if at any point during today's talk you have a comment or a question, or you want to share some of your experience with your practice, that is more than welcome. So feel free to jump in at any time. So this morning, I had recently read an article in Tricycle Magazine, which I used to call Tricycle, but I've been enlightened that it's actually Tricycle, which has some Buddhist meaning, which I don't know, but apparently there is one. So I'm trying to convert from tricycle to tricycle. So in Tricycle that I read, this is from the summer of 2025, so the previous issue to the current one. And I read this article that I thought was quite good and quite timely. The name of the article is Knowing Contentment, and it's by Moyzan Ian Kilroy, who is a Soto Zen priest in Ireland. And he's written some books, so he's quite a good writer. And before I kind of jump into why I went into this topic for today, let me just read his opening paragraph. I think it's fairly poetic, and you might enjoy it. I thought it was pretty well written. He says, "A great contentment is to be found walking in the middle way, with neither lack nor surplus. All things are in balance. Craving is put to rest, and there are sufficient things for life and happiness to thrive. Our insatiable desires have been calmed but not suppressed, and we find peace no matter what situation we're in. Of the mind states that flow from Zazen practice, contentment is one of the most precious." So there's a number of ideas here that I think would bear taking a closer look at. The first off is this idea that we lack neither surplus or we don't have the middle way, I think is what he's getting at here, is that we don't have too much stuff, and we don't have, but we do have enough. So the first point that that Moyzan makes is that it's very challenging and very difficult to have contentment when we don't have our basic needs met. So when we don't have enough to eat, when we don't have a place to live, and some of the other needs that we have, needs for safety, for example. Some people would certainly say a need for connection with others. So even if we have food, clothing, and shelter, but we don't have connection with others, we're going to suffer for that. Babies, we know this from psychology, famous study about babies who had their physical needs met, but not their psychological, emotional needs. So I think it was in Czechoslovakia, where there were tons and tons of orphans and being cared for by institutions. And so they would go around and give them, they were in cribs, and they gave them what they needed, food, shelter, and clothing, but they were never picked up and hugged. And many of those children died. So it's this need for connection is something that we feel very deeply. Um, so the idea here is that it's important to be able to have our basic needs met. And it's very, very challenging and very difficult to feel contentment when those needs are not there. The larger point, though, is that um, we have craving and we have desire. And although those things don't ever go away, we do recognize their sort of compelling nature. So we have this need to always have more. And we often feel that our contentment is somewhere other than where we are at the present moment. So it's always, up around the hill. It's when I get the job that I want. It's when I have the perfect relationship. It's when I have a certain amount of money in the bank. It's when I have, the car I want to drive. It's always someplace up in the future. And when we get some of those things, the contentment never seems to last. We're always kind of moving on to, okay, well, what's the next thing? Oh, I finally got, the bicycle that I wanted to buy and I'm riding it now, but there's actually a better bike. Maybe I can get that one. So contentment is always somewhere up in the future when certain circumstances are met. And I think what Moyzan is getting at here is that contentment is being all right with, and more than all right, actually, with whatever our current circumstances are. So that's kind of the first point that he makes. He says that I have known many content people in my life, and then he kind of gives some examples. He says most of the people that were content were not people in dire poverty, whose wants of food, housing, security, and other basic needs were not met. He also mentions that content people that he had known, these people were not highly successful people either. They were not the people who chased after high achievement and status. So he's not saying that high achievement and status is not perfectly fine. It is. I think we often strive to achieve various things in our personal lives and our professional lives. But he uses the word chase. And I think that's, a stand-in for desire, for drive, for all of those kinds of things. And we know, especially in our society, we can go way overboard on all of those things. And with the way that social media is these days, we're constantly comparing ourselves with people that are doing more. He mentions that a lot of the people that he knows who are content are just people living ordinary lives. He says many of the people that he knows that are content are people with little ego and few cares in the world. That's something that certainly we are continually looking at as we go through various teachings, whether I'm teaching or John or Dean or whomever you're listening to. You can always listen for a couple different themes within a Dharma talk. So almost all Dharma teachings will relate back to a few basic themes. And one of those themes is this with little ego, is no self. And wrapped into no self is the idea of interconnectedness. So there's no separate self. And because there's no separate self, there's interconnectedness with everything, with all, boundlessness. So this idea of no ego literally means that we are not who we think we are. And when we get puffed up in pride and all of that, that's going to lead us down a false path. It's going to lead us in the wrong direction. Folks with little ego who are living simple, uncomplicated lives. He says they were in harmony with their surroundings, whatever those surroundings were. So again, we're not looking at peaceful circumstances. We can be content with in the midst of whatever it is that is going on in our lives. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I chose this particular article, is because, right now, for many, many, many people on both sides of our political spectrum, there's a lot of discontent. There's a lot of unhappy people, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty. So being able to find contentment even in the midst of everything that's going on seems to be something that would be very helpful for all of us. And when we feel that contentment, it's something that we can then in turn share with everyone that we come across, everyone that we interact with, everyone that we can try to help. So he goes on to say, what was common among them, these folks who are contented, was their centered presence. Their full being was right there in the situation they were in. They were totally engrossed in the present task and the present moment. So of course, this is something that we are called on to do over and over and over again, is to bring ourselves back to the present moment. And so we have the present moment as in a moment in time, and then we also have the present moment as in we are present in that moment. We fully bring our attention and our awareness to whatever it is that we're doing. So I wanted to invite you to think about this idea of contentment in perhaps a couple ways. One way, if you can recall a time in your life when you felt particularly content. And the other aspect of it is thinking about someone or some situation or some place that represents or is a role model of contentment to you or for you. And it's not a trick question. And the reason I say that is because we know that the past is gone. And so even though I'm asking you to think about some time in the past when you were content, I think we can learn from the past. What were the conditions that were going on in my life? What was my mindset or my attitude? What was bringing me to this sense of contentment? So thinking about a time in the past has some value. But the reason I say it's not a trick question is because of exactly the idea that we can only be content in the present moment. It's the only moment that we have. So when I'm transcending whatever phenomenal reality that I'm in, and I'm going beyond that. Let's say, Kimberly, when you're painting, for example, or Joe, when you're walking your dog, or Ranigan, when you're writing, these various times when we are so present in the moment, in one with our activity, that time itself seems to drop away. And, we have this transcendent experience. Most people find it very satisfying, very exhilarating, that kind of thing. So one answer to that question would be, oh yeah, I remember feeling really content when I was a little kid, and I used to run around outside and that kind of stuff. Or I was really content when I got my first apartment, and even though it was small and I was still pretty broke, I was happy there. And then there's the answer of, oh yeah, I can feel contentment, as Moyzan pointed out, as an outflowing of my Zazen practice. the longer I practice and the more that I practice, the more often I tap into this deep feeling of contentment. So I'll ask you to think about that. When have you felt content? Whether it was a present moment transcendental experience, or it was a past time, or it's someone that you think of that represents that for you, or a place that you go to when you feel that. So I'll ask you to think about that, and you're welcome to share that if you'd like to. Yeah, Joe.
Thanks for bringing this up. This is a great subject because I feel have in recent years felt very content in most ways. And when it happens, when it hits the fan, I'm still content. It's just, I know I'm going to move through this, and then it's going to be like this again, and whatever. So things don't really bother me a whole lot. Like my husky getting skunked in the face this morning, I'll go home and wash her, and I'll be content with that. But there's something about the word content that it has bugged me, because I've thought about this before. For instance, if my wife said, "How are you with our marriage anyhow?" And I said, "Well, I'm content," I'd probably get punched.
That's what I said.
So there's something that seems to fall short about that word, but maybe that's just in my mind. And it seems like it should have a little more impact, but
yeah,
I'll have to be content with that.
I actually have a definition of contentment and some of its elements, so we'll go into that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that would probably be an inadequate response. Yeah, John.
I don't know why this came to mind, but it immediately came to mind as you started talking about this. When I was in high school, I was one of those kids that I'd sit down next to people and I'd talk to them or they'd talk to me. And I was in the Greyhound bus station waiting to go from Toledo to Norwalk, where I lived. And there was this wonderful little old black lady that was sitting next to me. And we started chatting, and she started telling me that her husband had died when she had like 5 kids, and then her husband died. And just how it was hard, but they got through it, and clearly she was content. She was content. She talked about how her kids always brought other kids home for dinner, and how, well, sometimes I had to add some more water to the soup or do whatever. But there was this wonderful sense that this woman was content with her life and who she was. And that story came to me immediately when you started talking about this. So I don't know why I haven't thought about her in years.
Yeah. And that is certainly part of the definition of contentment, is being okay even when things are not going well. So before I sort of framed it in, things that we want to have that we don't have and so forth, but it can also be things like grief or illness, lack of other needs that we might have, anxiety, depression, these kinds of things. It can be all those things. So being okay even in the midst of all of that.
Yeah. And obviously, clearly her life was challenged. But she was right there.
Yeah. Yeah, Renegade.
Oh, a couple of things. I really feel content. I'm not doing photography anymore, but I did it for a number of years, and I was totally in the moment when I was doing photography. And I guess I'd say the same thing about writing. But I think what's replaced, since I'm not doing photography, is when I'm walking in the woods. I'm so happy. And I frequently stop and hug the trees. And if I think of someone that I can't think of anyone right now about contentment, but in terms of someone I remember, but I'll think about it.
Yeah, John.
So not to throw cold water on all this contentment talk, but during my Zazen today, thoughts were coming in, and mostly I let them go. Sometimes I try to slow them down, which it's not usually doesn't work out for me. But today I kept trying to think about what these thoughts mean relative to contentment, because I have this mantra that this moment needs to be enough for me, which is, I guess, another way of saying contentment. And if I'm thinking about the future or a pleasant memory or some fantasy, is that basically admitting lack of contentment? And should I be processing my thoughts during Zazen? I don't know if that's kind of a separate line of inquiry.
Yeah, I appreciate your sharing your experience with that. And I definitely think that it can be for some of us at some time. If we're unhappy with whatever our present time experience is, we can easily get stuck in, oh yeah, I want to fantasize about how things used to be, or I remember when I was happy in the past, and I want to kind of go back to that, ignoring what's occurring right here and now. And that's really what our thoughts and our emotions do, is they're always pulling us here and there. Sticking with our present time experience is, I think, very important when we're doing Zazen, or when Zazen is doing us, however that works. I think a lot of times what I try to do is when I start getting interested in a certain line of thought, like you just were, kind of asking yourself, well, is this, just some sort of an escape, or do I need to be, more okay with whatever's going on right now? I'll kind of make a mental note of it to come back to it after Zazen. And I've even known some people that will keep a little notepad and they'll just write down a brief thought, and just so that they can let go of it, return to the breath and the present time experience, and then after Zazen to come back to it, and then we have time to think. Then we can do all the thinking we want, or all the reading or all the discussing or whatever, So that's kind of a trick that I think sometimes I'll do myself, is I'll just, I'll have like a key phrase or key word, and I'll be like, okay, I'll come back to that later. But right now I'm going to go back to just experiencing whatever is going on in Zazen. Yeah, John.
Just share with you one of the retreats I was at in Chikoji. Moyzan, one of the teachers, talked about they ask, what is your most basic teaching? And his most basic teaching was just receive. When you're in Zazen, just receive. If anything else is going on, let it go. But like Chris says, although I will admit I've told myself 100 times I'll think about this after Zazen, and somehow it's not there after Zazen. But that's the one thing I would suggest too, is just work at listening. That was very powerful to me when I heard it. because we can get so fancy about what we're doing. Just in those two words, it really is what we should do in Zazen, which is just let it come, whatever it is. And then let it go.
Mhm.
Easy.
Easier said than done. Yeah, sure. I'll get to easy one day.
If you figure it out, let me know. Okay.
Yeah, that is the prescription for Zazen. Yeah.
It's really the basis. It
Mhm.
was very powerful to me when he said that as I sat with it for a while.
Yeah, I think I resonated with what you said, Rannigan. For me, when those sort of transcendent moments come about, they're very, very often in nature. Very often in nature. Sometimes at home if it's a super quiet environment, um, but very often in nature. And yeah, I think about people like, I think about Dean, for example. I don't know if he'll ever hear this Dharma talk, but I'll talk about him for a moment. Dean loves jazz, and he loves baseball, and he loves people. And he seems really content to me in his life. So that would be an example of someone that I know that seems pretty okay with themselves and pretty okay with their lives and what they're doing and what he's doing. And then I think about, a couple spiritual leaders. Shahako Okamura comes to mind, Thich Nhat Hanh, and the Dalai Lama are all people that, they just always just seem so engaged and calm and just content with where they're at. And yet, they, are in a lot of what I would consider high pressure situations, teaching people the Dharma to vast audiences. That would be stressful for me. But they always seem happy and content. So I started mentioning there's three Dharma seals. So whenever you're hearing a Dharma talk or you're reading something, you can always find one or all of these elements within that Dharma talk. So the first one that I mentioned was the idea of no self. So if we can let go of our egos and ourselves, we're going to be much more content. And is when we discover no self, we also discover our interconnectedness. So that's the first Dharma seal, is no self. Another Dharma seal, usually considered the third one, is nirvana. And so what we're talking about here, going back to Buddha's original, Buddha being the physician and him giving us medicine, he recognized that all of us are suffering. So, and he kind of delineated what types of suffering that we're going through and the causes for suffering, and then suggested a way that we could deal with that. So, nirvana is being able to move beyond our suffering. Ben Conley gave a great definition of what nirvana or emptiness is. And he said it was the lack of desire, the lack of any aversion, and the lack of delusion. So greed, hatred, and delusion, when we're free of those things, we're free of suffering. And so when we are, as you described, for example, Rannigan, when you're talking about your photography or walking in nature, then we're able to let go of our suffering. We've transcended our suffering because none of those things are going on. We're just in the present moment. Yeah. Right.
What was the second Dharma seal?
Yeah, so the second Dharma seal is impermanence.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you wanted to expand on impermanence, it's it's more. So yeah, of course, everything is impermanent, but that also means that everything is dynamic. So there's always constant dynamic energy and change going on. And so And of course, that's a big place where we get caught because we don't want change. And if it's something we're enjoying, the positive side of that is if it's something that we're suffering from, then it's kind of nice when it goes away. So let me go into this definition of contentment. So the definition is a state of peaceful satisfaction. So I wanted to stop there for a moment, because if it's a state of what? It's a state of being. State of being. So it's a state of consciousness. So it's a state of being in peaceful satisfaction and happiness. What's another word for happiness that's maybe a little bit deeper for us as Buddhists is joy. And one of the things that, especially in Zen, because we're kind of austere and, sometimes we lose sight of it, and we're pretty disciplined. So sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that this is a very joyful practice. It frees us up. It allows us to be creative and to connect with others, and to be helpful to others, and ultimately raises our sense of happiness and joy and contentment. So another word for happiness is joy. So being happy and peaceful satisfaction and happiness with one's life and circumstances marked by a feeling of completeness or wholeness and appreciation for what one has rather than a constant desire for more. So appreciation for what we have, it's characterized by gratitude. And a deep sense of ease, even when life isn't perfect. So that's a more expanded definition of what contentment is. And it contains this idea of gratitude. And gratitude has come up several times in many of Dean's talks over his last few months. And at one point, I think Dean had mentioned that, the gratitude in and of itself could be one of the paramitas, one of the perfections. It's so valuable to us in terms of our overall sense of well-being that it's a practice that can bring us great contentment. So that's sort of the overall definition of contentment. Should I read it again without being so choppy about it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Contentment, a state of being of peaceful satisfaction and happiness with one's life and circumstances, marked by a feeling of completeness and appreciation for what one has rather than a constant desire for more, characterized by gratitude and a deep sense of ease even when life isn't perfect. I think that's a pretty good definition. So Moyzan goes on to say, when we meditate, we want for little but to sit still with the in-breath and out-breath. We know satisfaction with the state of things the way they are and seek out peace and quiet. With effort, we bring our awareness to when and where we are right now, cultivating. Just yeah. Cultivating wisdom and stillness. I do circumvent those things quite often, I can tell you. In this state, we no longer objectify the world as something we can use for our own selfish ends. So let me stop there for a minute. In this state, we no longer objectify the world as something we can use for our own selfish ends. So this goes back to another thing that Ben Conley was talking about when he was here, the idea of no self or no separate self, and the corresponding idea of how we all are are interrelated, or we have inner being. So when we are in that state, when we're in that state of mind and we have a recognition of our interdependence, then we are no longer seeing other people and other circumstances in our lives as being there for us to manipulate so that we can feel better, so that we can feel less pain, so we can feel greater happiness. As long as we are stuck in a separate, that is going to be how we tend to approach the world. So the basic, animal nature is to seek out pleasure and avoid pain. And as long as we see ourselves as separate selves, we're going to be doing exactly that. So, so Moyzan is saying that when we experience inner being, that we no longer are doing that. We recognize that when we hurt someone else, we're hurting ourselves. We recognize when we help someone, we're helping ourselves, and it's all one, it's all interconnected. He goes on to say, we intimately realize that we are deeply connected to the world around us. In truth, our body reaches far beyond the boundaries of our skin. It is the air we breathe and the food that sustains us, grown in fields watered by rain that falls, brought here by clouds that have crossed the broad ocean. So in Zen, and Dogen especially brought this point home. In Zen, what we're working on is to be present. Here is to be present with the true reality of all things. So when we're sitting in Zazen and we're present to the true reality of all things. And so this contentment and this reality is found in the present moment. So Dogen famously went to China for a 3-year journey. And back then, these kinds of journeys were pretty perilous. And I believe that someone that he went with actually died and did not make it back.
He went back.
He went back?
Yeah, he went back.
Okay.
I mean, he went towards home. I don't know if he made it, but I read about that recently. So.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So, and it's not to say that Dogen didn't learn a tremendous amount, but perhaps he learned a few things for us. And what he learned was that you don't have to go to other places to find enlightenment or to find your true original face or your true Dharma, Buddha nature. You don't have to travel to do that. It's right here, right now. It's always present with us. So that's an important aspect of contentment, is that it's always available. It's always present to us. When he returned to Kinnin-ji Temple in Kyoto with the teaching that everything we need is already with us, he also was teaching that Zazen was for everyone. It wasn't just for monks or nuns. Zazen was for everyone and everyone everywhere in all times and places. Wanting little and knowing contentment were to be found right where we are, not out in another far away and unattainable place. So he said that truth is originally all around and that we do not stray from the right state. So it's always present. It's always available to us. We don't have to go to any special place to, right.
I thought of another person that I'd like to share.
Oh, cool.
And I'm trying to think of her name. I'm awful with names, but the woman that lived with the chimps.
Oh, Jane Goodall.
Oh, Jane Goodall.
Jane Goodall recently died.
Mhm.
And there is a 55-minute documentary on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, it's tremendous. It was her last interview. And they promised not to air it until she died.
Wow.
And talk about content and wise. It's just a beautiful piece. I recommend it.
I've been reading a lot about her since her death, and what an amazing person she was. Yeah, what an amazing person. Yeah, she has a lot to teach all of us for sure.
I saw her at the Cleveland, I think it was the Museum of Natural History in the auditorium. Maybe it was actually, yes, it was the Natural History Museum. But she started out with her chimpanzee call when she was there on stage.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How cool. How cool that you saw her in person.
Moving higher and higher and higher, and then the scream.
Wow.
Yeah, she did it perfectly. You would have thought a big chimp was on stage.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
You know what her favorite animal was? A dog.
Yeah. That's right.
She talked
Yes.
about that.
Mhm.
It
Yeah,
wasn't
she said,
chips.
chimpanzees were a lot like people. She liked some, but not others. And dogs were just universally.
Yeah, you saw that.
She has a few comments about some of the authoritarian people that are alive right now.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll have to do the Dharma of Jane Goodall sometime. I think
That's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be very rewarding. Yeah.
I think that probably a lot of people that work really closely with animals have like a really deep contentment in that way, because
Mm.
animals just seem very free from a lot of the forward thinking, future orientation that we have.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I think all the time about how like overstimulated we are all of the time with like information, and it's like we're not really supposed to have this much awareness of like everything that's happening in the whole world all of the time.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't seem like it serves us.
Mhm.
And a writer and thinker that I like a lot wrote an article that was about 9/11, and he lives in DC. So he was like, as the plane, as that's all going down, it's in New York. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And then it was here. And I could walk down the block and like see planes hitting the Pentagon. And he talks about how what he decided to do that day was write letters to people. This piece of writing is called A Letter is a Vote for the Future. And he dated them for another day because he thought that people would think he was crazy if they got a letter. And they knew that he was just sitting in his house writing letters to people while all of this stuff was going on. But one of the things that he says is he talks about being a bird in a tree, and like birds and trees don't understand what's going on in Congress, or like they don't experience these distant things. They just survive by paying attention to what's going on around them. And so I think like people that work very closely with animals probably really internalize that level of presence to what is immediately happening.
Yeah. Thank you for your comment. I appreciate that very much. Since Jill and I are cat parents, I think we both learn a lot from observing our cat. And it's exactly what you were talking about, the present moment awareness, being in the present moment, not worrying about things that are external. And we can get very caught up in ideas and emotions and things that are all going on inside of our heads. But our Zen practice, kind of directs us towards just taking care of whatever is coming up right now in the moment. So if I am taking care of the moment, then I'm saying hello to the cashier, I'm smiling at people that are walking down the street, I'm helping people when it comes up. But, we can be bombarded by everything that's happening and end up feeling very powerless. We do have a lot that we can do, even if it's only a small thing. But we can make a difference, and that's I think, especially nowadays, is important to remember. And it's a source of contentment that no matter what happens, I can be okay, and I can help those around me to be okay. Yeah, very true, very true. So let's see, how are we doing? Oh gosh, wow, did that much time go by already? Oh, okay. Well, I had a couple other things that I'm not going to get to. So I'll just kind of wrap things up here so we can kind of end relatively on time here. Moyzan ends his article by giving an example of the eccentric Japanese poet Ryokan, who lived from 1758 to 1831, who well understood this teaching of frugality with wanting little. For this hermit monk, even a few twigs were a treasure from which he could make a fire. Known as Taigu, the great fool, he spent his days sitting in zazen, playing with local children, drinking sake with farmers, and wandering around writing poems. He often wrote his poems and then just left them behind. He was offered prestigious positions as poet and priest, but he declined them all. He preferred instead to remain in his simple, isolated hermitage, living surrounded by nature, content with his simple life. Ryokan had much to teach us. For him, even the sound of the rain was a precious gift. So here's a brief poem by him. Too lazy to be ambitious, I let the world take care of itself. 10 days' worth of rice in my bag, a bundle of twigs by the fireplace. Why chatter about delusion and enlightenment? Listening to the night rain on my roof, I sit comfortably with both legs stretched out. So this idea of low ego, connecting with people, writing, being creative, but living a very simple and contented life. So we all have ways in which we tend to overcomplicate our lives. So a lot of the suffering that we have in our lives is self-imposed. And therefore, if we examine our lives closely, we can oftentimes eliminate some of those things that are causing us and those around us to have suffering. When I think of my younger self before I was retired and I was still in the householder phase of life, I was constantly striving, constantly looking for more, constantly wanting, unhappy when I didn't have the things I wanted. It's what we refer to as the rat race. I was really, and I'll end with this, but I was really happy that you picked Song of the Grass Hut for the reading today, because that goes right along with Ryokan's poem about living a very simple life. And I just wanted to look at this one line at the end before we close. Thousands of words, myriad interpretations are only to free you from obstructions. So the question that I would leave you with are, what are, some of our self-imposed obstructions? What are some of the things that we feel that we have to have in order to be happy? And where does our true contentment come from? So, yeah, Joe.
I want to squeak in one last thought.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the paramitas a little earlier, but I think the first paramita, generosity, sort of encompasses this whole issue of contentment and helping others attain what it is they really need and do it with joy and compassion. But that does not exclude the self. And, when we help ourselves, we're better capable of helping others. And when we help others, we're actually helping ourselves. And the benefit goes to both.
Yeah, definitely. I very much agree. Yeah, so interconnected with the first paramita. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, John.
Real briefly, two thoughts came together for me in a different way, and that is how antithetical capitalism is to what we're doing.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
Teaches us every day. I mean, not that I didn't know all of this, but whether we're looking at the internet, whether we're looking at advertising, whether we're looking at the TV, we're constantly being told we don't have enough.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be content.
Yeah.
And I say that simply because I need, not that it wasn't there before, but I need to redouble my efforts to see that. And that's what I take from this.
Yeah.
Thank you for this teaching. It's been very helpful.
Oh, great. Thank you, John. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah, our capitalist society is based on advertising to convince us that we need things that we don't necessarily need. And
Never enough.
everything that we consume is meant to be replaced. So even if you get what you want, something better is going to come along, or what you have is going to break down. So it's our entire system is based on our desire.
Or it's the next step, We got this, well, the next step.
Yeah, right. That's right. Instead of, as Moyzan pointed out, just being. It's a state of being. Contentment's a state of being, yeah.
I was thinking about that too in the early part of your talk when you were talking about people's levels of contentment based on like where they're at, kind of like on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like if they have food and shelter versus if they already kind of have everything they want, but they still want more.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this endless pursuit for them. Right. And it was reminding me that I know that there's studies that have been done that have shown that typically it's like the working class who are like the happiest because they don't have as much of a drive. Like there's less of a possibility of having more, but they're like close enough to potentially becoming homeless or having one thing like really screw up having their basic needs met. So they actually really appreciate what they have. So I was thinking about that.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. I heard something kind of related to that or similar to that, which was, if you have needs, you're most likely to get help with those needs or to get your needs met from poor people. That the poor are more likely to share the little that they have than those who have an abundance of what they, more than what they need. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Yeah.
So I think that there's like an intrinsic, like if you're in an area where people survive through mutual aid, there's an implicit sense of connection to their whole existence that I think is like largely missing from communities where they don't have to rely on each other to survive.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, very true. All right, any other thoughts or comments before we wrap up today? All right, well, if not, then we'll go ahead and chant out.
May our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.
All right. Bye, Jill.
Bye, Jill.
Hi, Joe.
Oh, she sent a little heart.